Welcome to Season 8 of Draft Utopia on both TalkShoe and yes, this is the very first episode through QuickTime Player, which will be live streamed to YouTube immediately following this show. So you'll have an archive of the episode on TalkShoe as well as the entire show on YouTube. And joining me today are Tracy Porter and Ryan Romero, who have made their TalkShoe debuts last year. We're entering the 8th season of Draft Utopia. It was only like 30 episodes my first year, and then we split up the second and third season into fractions, like half seasons. Then we had season 4 was the 2014 year, and then the year after that, I think it was 2014-2015. We had Joey come on, because I remember season 2 was 012, 013, and then seasons 3 and 4 were split up. So season 5 was Joey's first year. And then Mark came on last year in season 6. We had some other people on, but Joey and Kerb will be entering their 4th year on this podcast. And Ryan and Tracy, they're in their 2nd year here, and this is the very first episode that's going to be uploaded directly to YouTube. So without further ado, Tracy, Ryan, how are you guys doing today before we get into some amazing sports topics? Same here. We're all anxious. It's like that song "Football's Back." It's a song on YouTube. We'll post it to TRC later. That's not important. We'll stick with the topics we've been assigned, and we'll start with the preseason game. And after that, we can get into some additional NFL headlines. But the preseason game was on last night. I know there were threads about this everywhere. There were threads about this in TRC. There were threads about this at Scouting College Football, thanks to Mark Suba, who actually called into this podcast a few years ago. There were threads about this in National Predictions League, which Robert McNeil runs. There were threads about this everywhere in various Facebook groups across the country. But looking at this game, what we saw last night was Blaine Gabbert being money early in the game. And then after those first 2 possessions, it felt like Dallas adapted. And Chidobe Awuzie, I didn't like what he did the first 2 possessions, but after that, he really stepped up and made a huge impact for this Dallas Cowboys secondary that looked pretty much lackluster elsewhere. Taco Charlton, he got by a double team on 3rd down, but he was lined up at left end against the right tackle and the right guard. When he was lined up at right end, he struggled throughout the night. But he was going up against a left tackle and Will Holden, who they played at guard. So that's understandable why he struggled on that side. And Dallas, I think the philosophy of the preseason is actually going to change now because teams can't cut their rosters. Like, teams used to have to be able to cut their rosters every week by cutting a few players until they got it down to 53. Now you can have your 90-man rosters or whatever, how many players you can have max, and then you can cut those guys down to 53 by the end of the preseason. So teams are going to have more flexibility to go through trial and error through these preseason games. So I feel like Arizona knows Carson's their starter, Stanton's their backup. They're not going to jeopardize either one, and instead they're just going to play Blaine Gabbert and Trevor Knight each for a half to figure out who's going to be their guy. I think they're pretty certain that Gabbert's going to be the 3rd stringer, and they're probably going to cut Trevor Knight, but at the same time, they're going to play both quarterbacks before they come to that decision, just to keep Carson and Stanton healthy.
Oh, yeah, I agree. To be honest, though, I definitely do see Blaine Gabbert being the guy in Arizona as far as being the backup goes. I mean, you can't really argue with the 185 yards passing, and I mean, 13 yards in average. That sounds like a good backup quarterback that is able to manage a game with these guys out. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I agree with that, man. I agree with Chris. He actually made a good value point yesterday, and he
Yeah, absolutely. And we saw that the fourth quarter, it was basically a chess match between Trevor Knight and Cooper Rush. And that can be pretty dreadful for the casual NFL fan. But at the same time, you're going to get to see a lot of rookies and stuff. Like when the Chiefs play in the preseason, you'll see Alex Smith on the bench, but you'll see Patrick Mahomes. He'll get first team action. You'll see the backups, the third stringers. Like they'll play Mahomes for a quarter, like they do with most like they do with the first team quarterback, but their backup, because the Chiefs have a second string, a third string, and a fourth string quarterback. So the Chiefs would probably use Mahomes in the first quarter, their third stringer in the second quarter, and let their fourth string guy play the second half, try to get a feel for him, whether or not he can make the roster or if they're going to have to cut him. Because that's sort of what this is. It's about getting a feel for what your guys can do on a consistent basis. I think that's going to be the new philosophy and approach to the preseason as we continue to see more games. So I just thought that was a really interesting dynamic in last night's game because Dak Prescott didn't play, and Kellen Moore and Cooper Rush were the two quarterbacks that did play. So I feel like we will see that for that reason. Now, with New England, I think they only two. Nope, they have Garoppolo and they have Brissett. And if they have a fourth quarterback on their roster, which I'm sure they do, then they'll probably only play Garoppolo for the first quarter. And if they only have Garoppolo and Brissett, they'll probably play each of those guys a half to see if either one can be Brady's successor. But this definitely changes the dynamic because the only starters on a 22-man roster who are projected regular season starters that are going to get first quarter action are the guys fighting for starting jobs. That's how much of a game changer this is, in my opinion, Ryan and Tracy. What are your thoughts before we get to some additional NFL topics and perhaps even some of the free agent signings in both the NHL, the NBA, the trade deadline, other things like that? What are your thoughts on just general preseason philosophies? Because I feel like from a mentality, it's shifting to that standpoint. I still think we'll see Paxton Lynch and Trevor Siemian on Denver in the preseason because they don't know who they want to start yet. And I feel like the Denver Broncos, Ryan's team, are probably the one team that's probably going to play more first-teamers in the preseason than any other team in the NFL because they've got offensive tackle position battles at both spots. They've got a position battle at quarterback. They've got three guys fighting to be the slot receiver job over behind Thomas and Emmanuel Sanders. So Denver might play those three guys at wide receiver, line them up in separate packages, see if they've built any synergy with their quarterbacks, and just go about it like that. Because I feel like at that point they have that luxury because they want to know who their guys are. That's what this is all about. It's screening players and finding out which guys are going to start for you come week one. That's what the preseason's mainly been about. But the philosophy of how it's going to be about sort of changes.
Yeah, I agree with. I think the only two teams that will possibly play their starters and their backup quarterback is the Denver Broncos, as you mentioned. And I'm thinking maybe Kansas City too with Alex Smith and Patrick Mahomes.
That could be a situation as well. My thing with that, Tracy, is the Chiefs have already decided they're probably going to let Alex Smith ride the season. And if that's the case, they can play Mahomes for a quarter, maybe even the entire first half, just to get a feel if he can. Because I think the Chiefs are probably going to let him play just the first quarter to get him acclimated in the first game. But in the second game, they're probably going to let him play the entire half just to get a read on if he's ready to succeed Alex Smith. Because I think that's a big variable as well.
I agree with that. Think about that, man.
You know, I really think right now the Broncos are in a situation where they're able to see maybe going to have that catch in their first straight games. So I think that's definitely a good point. But the original question of like preseason philosophy, obviously, as we all know, you kind of determine who's going to start. But as a scout, putting on my general manager hat, I'm looking at a lot of these second and third stringers who were just in case one of my starters gets hurt, who have the most potential to be able to maybe trade like a fourth or fifth round draft pick for something that's really going to pay off in the long term.
Like with Denver, we know that Harris and Talib are going to be the starting corners, so we're probably going to see a lot of Bradley Roby, Brendan Langley cornerback sets. We're probably going to see Parks at safety and the third stringer fighting for the job. We're probably also going to see Justin Simmons. So a lot of Denver's draft picks that haven't started yet, those are guys you're going to see a lot of in the preseason. Like guys that were excellent value picks, DeMarcus Walker. Those are guys you're going to see quite a bit of from the Denver Broncos throughout this preseason.
I'm really excited to see Marcus Walker play just because I've heard rumors based on the forums and then also the tweets sent out by Mile High Sports Report that Garrett Cole has supposedly lifted Marcus Walker up like the monochrome chef. So it makes you wonder how strong the offensive line is going to be, but also what's going on with Marcus Walker.
Yeah, so is Bowles that good, or is this DeMarcus Walker guy? Because I know scouts I talked to before the draft were like, why do you have a first-round grade on DeMarcus Walker? Yeah, he's a sack artist, but his motor sucks. Like, some people in the draft community don't want consistent guys who get to the quarterback. They'd rather have somebody who has a good motor and is fast off the edge or fast off the interior, even though they only get 5 sacks. So it depends on who you ask, because sometimes a faster player can translate, and other times they don't because they didn't have that natural production. The results vary.
I agree with that. I think
I agree with that.
a player like that would have been like Merville. He had a lot of success with the Broncos, but then I haven't really seen too much from him left of.
Yeah, and Dumerville wasn't a sack artist with Denver, so he had to go to the right team, get acclimated with the coaching staff, develop that part of his game, and once he lost that explosiveness, he wasn't the same player. That's a perfect example.
Did you guys notice how the Dallas Cowboys were bringing their safeties up to the fourth team? I think I saw it one play, like in the second half, when they had like a more mind-went pass or something. They had to do safety. They had their safety and the cornerback coming up.
Yes, and that was one instance where you saw Byron Jones began that game as the starting safety. Thomas Coburn just got our message he's going to call in shortly, and when he does, we'll bring up the Ryan Tannehill injury.
And so do you guys feel like the Dallas Cowboys will blitz a lot more this season?
I actually think that the Dallas Cowboys are going to play it a lot more strategical. I think they might blitz a little bit more, but I think they're going to do it in a more secure way. Because I mean, they've always been aggressive in my eyes. I feel like they've always blitzed their linebackers, but I think that they're actually going to start blitzing their safety on corners and really making they've come to win this year.
Yeah, they have a lot of stuff with the linebacker spot too.
Yep. And Thomas Coburn's the Dolphins guy, so as soon as he calls in, we're going to switch things over to the Dolphins. But for now, we'll briefly get the NHL Free Agency winners out of the way so that we don't have to mention it again later in the podcast. And my NHL Free Agency winners got to be the Detroit Red Wings. They got Trevor Daley from the Pittsburgh Penguins as a defenseman, and he was the line one defenseman this year once Chris Letang got injured. So the Red Wings gave him a huge contract. They got Rasmussen. They are my off-season winner for those two things. They get the draft pick, and then they get the free agent, the veteran defenseman on top of that, who was with Dallas, was with Pittsburgh when they won both of their Stanley Cups, and is now about to go to a Red Wings team that's opening up a new stadium, Little Caesars Arena, where the Pistons will be playing as well. So I think the Detroit Red Wings are one of my off-season winners for NHL free agency. Any specific teams that you think won the NHL offseason through free agency, Ryan, or do you agree with me that the Red Wings were that one team?
I actually do agree with you about the Red Wings. To be honest, I think that when they realized they were going to the playoffs, I think they were expecting to found that out. That's when their whole front office just said, hey, we got to start making some big moves, thinking ahead of their scouts to look at all the names of the free agents and said, hey, they're going to be the guys that are going to be the pieces that we need, not only need
So they can make the conference semifinals or the conference finals. That's sort of what I think that's a little bit too high, but I definitely think they're going to be there within a year or two. But it'll be interesting to see what the Detroit Red Wings do this upcoming NHL season. And Thomas Coburn is here with us, so we will shift back into gears through the NFL. Sorry, NBA fans, you have to wait a little bit longer before we break down the free agency winners and losers, because the Ryan Tannehill news is the biggest news in the NFL right now, by far and away. And there have been some things that have caused me to alter my season previews on Draft Utopia. I've done 22 of those, or 21. No, I've done 22. I'm about to start 23 after the show today. But this thing with the Dolphins might be the biggest altering thing yet, because this is a Dolphins team. I had them at 7-9 in my season preview the other day because I don't trust the secondary, but there are winnable games on the schedule. And if you lose Ryan Tannehill, say goodbye to splitting with the Patriots. Say goodbye to beating Oakland at home. Say goodbye to sweeping the Bills. You'll probably lose in Buffalo without Tannehill. I know Matt Moore did it last year in Buffalo. I don't know if he'll do it again. Maybe that was the Jets. I think he might have beaten both of those teams on the road, but I feel like losing Ryan Tannehill is a huge detriment for the Miami Dolphins this season. And I could see Brandon Doughty actually starting this year if Matt Moore screws up. So there's definitely some intrigue and buzz with the Dolphins. Jay Ajayi had the concussion, but he should be healthy and ready to go. And this affects all Dolphins owners. I know this affects the Dolphins as a team. It affects any fantasy owners who drafted Tannehill. It also affects fantasy owners who drafted Jay Ajayi, because if Tannehill's out for the entire year, teams are just going to stack the run against Miami and dare Matt Moore to pick him apart. And Matt Moore actually had some successful games last year, so if he can play like that under Adam Gase's system once again, then you are looking at a guy who will get overpaid big time in free agency next year. Because I think he's in this contract year, Matt Moore.
I guarantee Matt Moore doesn't play the entire season.
I think Brandon Doughty will get some time as the starter.
I don't even think Brandon Doughty will play. You bet your ass we're going to the SA.
You think we're going to...
I think Miami's season all depends on what quarterback we're going to use. If we use Matt Moore, we're not going to the playoffs. If we use Brandon Doughty, we're not going to the playoffs. If we use Kaepernick, we might have a chance, but I doubt it. If we use Jay Cutler, we probably have the best chance. If we use Brock Osweiler, we might have a chance.
Well, Brock Osweiler's the backup on the Cleveland Browns. The Houston Texans traded their second-round draft pick just to get Osweiler off their hands. So, and Matt Moore is in a contract year. So if Moore screws up this year, yes, I don't think the Dolphins are going to bring him back. And I've already heard reports that that Gase is going to draft his guy in 2018, regardless of whether Tannehill plays or not, because they want a more reliable backup. And the new regime hasn't really drafted a guy outside of Doughty. And some people within Miami's organization consider him a warm body. Even though he's a great guy, has the work ethic, studied the playbook during his honeymoon, it's a great story. But the bottom line is he hasn't gotten them the results that Miami's wanted, from what we've heard.
Yeah.
So that's another reason.
Yeah, I think it's funny. People think I've been here seeing people think Tannehill's done in Miami. Like, this is the last time he'll ever put on a uniform. I'm like, what? No. Miami's committed to him. He's their guy. He's their franchise quarterback.
Same way that Colts are compared to, because I know one guy I podcast with, he thinks the Colts need to move on from Andrew Luck. And for starters, they can't until at least 2020 because if they release him before 2020, they lose salary cap money. So there's a financial side to this.
Same thing with Tannehill.
Exactly.
Same thing with Tannehill.
Exactly. Bingo, Thomas. You get me. You get where I'm coming from with this.
Yep. I feel like Miami, the best case scenario, is to obviously don't make any decisions until you know the extent of Tannehill's injury. And once you do, you immediately get quarterbacks in preparation. I heard that when Gates interviewed for the 49ers job, he had an offensive game plan in place if he was going to have Kaepernick as his quarterback. So, I don't know. Man, I'm 50-50 on that whole decision there if they go after Kaepernick. I do like RG3, but you can't trust him to stay healthy. And so, there's that. I feel like Kaepernick and RG3 could, like, fit, because it's kind of like a spread offense, but kind of not.
That's an interesting situation, Thomas, and
But I mean, Karen or what's his face, Jimmy Garoppolo. But like Garoppolo, that's gonna cost a lot.
I don't think they would get. I don't think Jimmy Garoppolo is even an option for Miami at this point because, and the reason I'm holding the phone up to my head on YouTube now is because I'm not sure if people will be able to hear me on talk show even though I'm on speakerphone, so I'm nervous about that. So, but with back to the Ryan Tannehill thing, you look at the quarterbacks that are going to be on the market. I'm looking at somebody like Tom Savage from the Texans because he's in a contract year as well. All of the Vikings quarterbacks are in contract years. If the Miami Dolphins take the free agency route like you're implying, Thomas, and they get a free agent in 2018 instead of a quarterback through the draft, then you're going to be looking at one of those Vikings quarterbacks or Tom Savage because Savage and Watson have both done well in training camp this year for Houston so far. And I could see Houston moving on from Savage because they invested a lot in Watson, and I could see Tom Savage as the backup to Ryan Tannehill next season. Thoughts on that?
I was just talking about free agency like right now, not for next season. Next season, I think that you should draft a backup next season or get a free agent, but like get like a young, like Savage. Yeah, he's kind of young, but like Tannehill or he's like mobile guys. Like you don't have to be like full prep, but like mobile guys, and that all helps. And so like, what's that?
How about making a trade for Brian Hoyer?
Brian Hoyer's got a 2-year contract with the 49ers, and I don't think that's going to happen. You're looking at a few different scenarios here. I think it comes down to what some of these teams want to do because with the 49ers, you got Hoyer as your starter, your backup is Matt Barkley, and then you have C.J. Beathard and Nick Mullins, who I had a higher grade on than Beathard, even though I don't think either quarterback should have been drafted as your third stringers. So it's Beathard?
Yeah.
Okay. But the thing with this quarterback situation, it's really tricky, and there aren't very many short-term guys on the market outside of Kaepernick, Cutler, unless the Dolphins want to do something batshit insane like sign Johnny Manziel, which they're not going to do. There is absolutely no way.
That would be bad. Manziel in Miami is not good at all.
The Dolphins would go from the Miami Dolphins challenging New England to Miami Vice. The Dolphins would go from the Miami Dolphins to Miami Vice under Johnny Manziel. That would be terrible.
Yeah. That would be way too tempting for Manziel to party. Yeah, that would be bad.
Like, he would be out in South Beach every week. Like, he wouldn't even be practicing with the team. He'd be out in South Beach just drinking.
Yeah, that would be. Yeah.
So Tom Savage would be the option right now for the Miami Dolphins.
Yes, but the earliest they could get him is the 2018 free agency period, but that's probably the most likely scenario as to what's going to happen after this season. You also have to look at the quarterbacks that could get cut. Guys like Trevor Knight, guys like Taysom Hill if he doesn't make the roster. You've got to look at some of these guys that don't make final rosters as options the Dolphins may explore after the preseason as well.
You know, if Taysom Hill came to Miami, you know how much I would love that.
I don't think Taysom's going to get cut. I'm just bringing up the hypothetical scenario where if this quarterback gets released due to how many quarterbacks are on a team's depth chart, then maybe the Dolphins will pick up this player. It's like a math equation. Miami Dolphins quarterback equals Y, blah, blah, blah. This player on this roster equals X, blah, blah, blah. Will this player go to this team? There's so many variables. I'm already boring our audience by talking about mathematics. So
That's a hypothetical situation to me. I was saying also, if Taysom built into Miami, I'd love that. Anyway, I've also heard Kirk Cousins is a potential option. Like, Miami's not talking to him, but I've heard a lot of people bring him up, like make a trade for Kirk Cousins. But I know Tracy wouldn't be too happy with that.
yep, and there's two players that are in contract years that have not been extended yet that are upgrades over Tannehill, in my opinion. One is Kirk Cousins, the other is Matthew Stafford. Both of them have not been extended, and I would not be surprised if Matthew Stafford bolted and headed to the San Francisco 49ers. If the Lions miss the playoffs and go 5-11 like I'm expecting them to in my season preview, he might bolt because there'll be a complete overhaul. Ziggy Ansah's a free agent. Glover Quinn is a free agent. Tahir Whitehead's a free agent. Haloti Ngata's a free agent. The Lions would be in such a terrible situation at that point that Stafford would realize, well, he has a family. He's a father now. He had two twins born in March, so Stafford would realize, I have to do what's best for my family and provide for them, even though the Lions have been awesome to me for years. I think he would explore the possibility there because Kyle Shanahan would just get so much more out of Stafford than somebody like Jim Caldwell. It's nothing against Caldwell. It's just Shanahan will just get so much more out of Stafford. Like, if the 49ers got Stafford and then drafted Christian Kirk, kept that defense intact, they'd actually have a legitimate shot at winning a Super Bowl in a few years when the Super Bowl 54 comes to Tampa Bay. And Stafford's from Tampa Bay, too, so. He was born in Tampa Bay. That was his birthplace. Then he played high school football in Texas, and then he went to Georgia, and then he went to the Lions. These teams, it's like Colin Cowherd said on his show, these teams who have A-list quarterbacks never let them hit free agency. It's like when CBS letting Nance hit free agency. It's not going to happen. Stafford and Cousins are probably both going to get extended, and if neither team extends their guys before the start of the season, you can argue they both deserve to be fired because you know that if Ansah only had 2 sacks last year, he's already on the PUP list now for the Lions, then you don't want to worry about anyone else on this roster defensively. You just want to get Stafford locked up so you know you're still in a position to contend because you look at the Washington Redskins, I don't know what's going to happen with Cousins or Stafford yet, but those are the two guys. And then after everybody else, there's a drop-off between those two quarterbacks, the quarterbacks in the draft, and then the rest of the scrubs in free agency. It's like a tier. And the tier 1 guys, the blue-chip guys, are Stafford and Cousins because of their veteran presence. And then the draft guys are in the middle, and then...
Another guy that I heard is a viable option is that Miami could make a trade for Alex Smith.
That could be a possibility to explore in a year from now. I could see the Dolphins giving up a draft pick to get Smith as a backup, and they'd move on. But that's contingent on whether or not Patrick Mahomes has success, because I'll mention the Chiefs on August 13th, the day we have Deveron Davis on the show. because we were originally going to do the AFC and NFC South that day, but then we realized our producer told us it's not feasible to get those 4 teams into the show as well as the NFC South teams with all that parity, and it'd be literally impossible to get all of that squeezed into one show before a guest comes on when you have Joey, Ryan, myself talking. So we'll probably break down the divisions and we'll see what happens. And
So, whatever quarterback Adam Gase chooses to go with, I'm confident. You said Matt Moore. Fuck Matt Moore. But any quarterback besides him, I'm confident we can make the playoffs because of how brilliant of an offensive mind Adam Gase has and how good he is with quarterbacks.
if I were Phil Simms, I would do everything in my power to get Tony Romo to go to the Dolphins so I could go back into the booth with Jim Nantz. Just saying.
Yeah, that's funny.
Tony Romo would be an upgrade over Matt Moore. He wouldn't be an upgrade over Tannehill necessarily, but he'd be an upgrade over Matt Moore.
How about Jacob Winston?
Winston's locked up. There's not really any quarterbacks that are going to hit the market, so we'll see what happens. That was Thomas Coburn. I don't know if he's calling back into the show, but I would like to thank him for coming on and talking about the Ryan Tannehill situation. If he does call back in, we'll get his input on some of the next topics, but let's start with the NBA free agency. And what are your thoughts on this? Ryan, Tracy, do you have any final thoughts on the Tannehill situation before we get to the NBA free agency, which will be our next topic?
I'm sorry, I lost connection.
I'm getting surprised I'm getting shocked that he's probably going to have season in his tournament.
You know, Tannehill?
Yeah.
I lost service, guys. Sorry, I'm back. But, yeah, right now it's just a whirlwind of crap.
I mean, it's 2 years in a row that a top, well, not really top quarterback, but 2 elite quarterbacks have gotten into the preseason. Ryan Tannehill and Teddy Bridgewater last year.
Tannehill did get hurt in preseason last year. He got hurt towards the end of the season.
That's what he's doing.
Yeah, but he was talking about 2 quarterbacks over the last 2 years. I don't know if you understood the context of that question.
Yeah. Chris, another guy that's like undrafted rookie that we did is Kenny Clark too, Washington State. I like him. I don't really think he did, but yeah, I think we definitely should go young over old, depending on what young quarterbacks we go after.
That's a fair point.
Right now, but for next year, we definitely need to draft.
I agree, Thomas. That's a good point.
Hopefully, Thomas. Good one.
I don't know what round you take a quarterback. You probably have to go early because all the guys that have starter potential are going to fly off the board the first 2 rounds. But there's going to be guys who are good quality backups like Mike White or Riley Ferguson, who I think is a borderline starter. But there's guys you can get later in the draft. Logan Woodside. There's guys who would be good fits for Gase's system. So I could even see Quentin Flowers on Miami. I know you would hate that. Ken would love that. He'd be like, Quentin Flowers should be starting over Ryan Tannehill. And then you'd be like, dude. And then it would just...
Hey, I wouldn't mind Kenny Hill in Miami.
Kenny Hill would be good, too. JT Barrett depends. It depends on who they get. So we'll see what happens. The Ken person we mentioned, that's Ken LeBlanc. He's the admin of Scouting College Football, a group where we usually talk about stuff in, and he was kind enough to let us post some stuff on our page, and he's also got a show on Sports Central late night with LeBlanc. So if you want to hear more Kenisms or stuff from his thoughts, you can go to those places to check his stuff out. But as far as pretty radical is a better way to put it, but yeah, let's and by radical I mean we'll see. He's chill, but at the same time, I'm not going to comment on this further because I don't want to jeopardize my friendship with anyone here on this podcast or on Facebook. So let's move on to the NBA free agency. But first, I'd like to get Ryan's thoughts on this situation because we've been giving Ryan the silent treatment for over 10 minutes, maybe even 15 minutes, and I feel like an a-hole about that. So we're going to let Ryan talk about that, and he can lead off with the NBA free agent signings.
Yeah, I kind of feel like a stepchild. Anyway, point being though, honestly, my intake is this. I think that Miami, if they really wanted to win, they would either go after Jay Cutler or they'd go after Colin Kaepernick. I think Colin Kaepernick would be a really good match because he's mobile. He'd be able to, not have to worry about the flaws in the offensive line that Miami has, but he'd be able to have a receiver in Miami as well. So I think Colin Kaepernick would be a really good fit there. Third, he's just playing in that warm weather. He played in San Francisco. His stats weren't too bad last year. He was just playing. So he already knows what it's like to start. So I think he would fit well. Now, Jay Cutler, I really like that match because he put him in the shotgun more. I mean, he plays good when he has targets. And Miami definitely does have a good set of wide receivers. So I think that he'd actually be able to thrive. On the flip side, though, he might also have to worry about the Ryan Tannehill situation again because Jay Cutler doesn't really get healthy throughout the year.
The thing is, though,
Thomas, just to be that guy, give Tim Tebow a call.
What?
I said just to be that guy, give Tim Tebow a call. Bring Tebow back.
Just real quick, let me cut in and I'll shut up. With the Kaepernick thing, though, the majority of Miami's fan base is cheap. That would not bode well for Kaepernick's life, I would say.
Yep. And with that being said, we're going to move on to the NBA free agency headlines because
Yeah, but Tito Alonso would not get along with Kaepernick at all.
all right, so we still got some topics we need to get through, and we're going to get to the NBA free agency stuff right now. So any thoughts about Thomas, any thoughts about Miami, you can post that on Facebook group and tag us in some Dolphins news because we need to get the ball rolling with the NBA headlines from last month, the best signings for the free agency period.
Yeah,
Ryan, this is your area of expertise, your bread and butter, along with cooking. So why don't you break down your biggest winner in the NBA free agency period?
Did you say me?
Yep.
Okay, sorry, the phone had cut out for a second. Honestly, I mean, there's definitely some good signings and stuff. I would say that the biggest move in general to me, though, was probably Jimmy Butler going to Minnesota Timberwolves. That was probably the biggest single impact move I saw on the offseason, just besides the Gordon Hayward situation as well. So my two choices for that are going to be Minnesota Timberwolves and Boston Celtics for possibly having the best free agency.
Yeah, it's weird. Usually we see guys dominate in free agency headlines. We didn't see that this year. We saw LeBron bolt a few years ago to go to Miami. Then he went back to Cleveland. We saw Durant go to Golden State. And we didn't see that this year. We saw different things we saw all of the big moves were during the draft or before the draft because we had the Chris Paul thing. I think that was right after the draft, but you had before the draft with the Brook Lopez trade. You had during the draft with Jimmy Butler, and then I think you had right after the draft before free agency with Chris Paul. So all the big players, the big names, the big dominoes, all of those players got dealt before free agency. And then everything else just sort of filtered itself out one by one. So there really wasn't any big moves after that. I mean, I'd say Millsap going to Denver is probably the biggest free agent signing, but all of the big blue chip moves, those were made before free agency, predetermined ahead of time, so that teams who knew they were losing those guys could get some value in return, Ryan. It just feels like it was set up that way this year.
Chris, so I don't know if I mentioned this to you guys at all, but this past Monday, I had heard on our local radio station that Portland Blazers, they were heavily interested in Kyrie
Before we get to that, I was gonna ask Ryan how if he agreed with me or not on how some of the biggest moves this offseason have sort of been predetermined, like before free agency started, because I think that's sort of what I see.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Just because, like you said, one of the bigger free agent signings was Paul Sutton for the Nuggets. And I mean, I'm a huge Nuggets fan, but as a basketball analyst, that wasn't really a big signing. And I mean, everything he does is look fast. They need to trade up to acquire a player for value, like you talked about, etc. So, I mean, other than that, I mean, it's been kind of quiet from, you know.
Yeah. It's been dead in the water.
Even Dwight Howard, he got traded for a draft pick to Charlotte, so he was in that mix of guys who got traded for value picks as well.
Dwight Howard sucks now.
Yeah, he's a journeyman now. He was like a beast on the Magic back in the day, but he's become a journeyman since.
I don't think there was really any big time free agent signing besides Jimmy Butler. I mean, just all the other superstar players, they were already signed already. CP3 going to the Houston Rockets, that was a good trade.
Yeah, somewhere out there, Danny Ainge is flipping me off because we didn't acknowledge the Gordon Hayward signing until now. Because it's like, I just had this realization moment where I was like, wow, we totally ignored the Gordon Hayward signing. That was the biggest signing in free agency, and we completely looked past that. So, yeah.
I'm a big Gordon Hayward fan.
Shame on me. Shame on me.
The Timberwolves and the Celtics have the best free agency period in general. Just the Celtics take a huge on Hayward. I mean, especially since it sounds like they're actually going to move him from a forward to a shooting guard. So he's going to be playing for your shooting guard. I mean, in itself, that's your spot. So
He's good for both, though, really, Ryan.
oh yeah, for I mean, he's probably one of the better players in the league. I mean, he's really versatile. He can play forward and shooting guard. But it does look like in a particular circumstance they want him to be the shooting guard position.
Yeah, I also think the new collective bargaining agreement had a lot to do with a lot of players going to different teams. I mean, they went from it dropped from 102 to 99 billion. So that has a lot to do with players signing 3 or 4 year contracts. I mean, look at the ascension that James Harden and John Wall have.
All I know is nobody wants to go to the Cavs right now with all the turmoil that's going on.
Yeah, it's like, after heading into this season, I figured, well, because I was one of the people that thought Cleveland would beat Golden State in a 7-game series like Tracy. So my thought process was, well, we're going to see Golden State break up their team, and Cleveland's going to keep their team together. But what we've seen is actually the exact opposite of that. Golden State's keeping their team together, putting the pieces in place to assemble a dynasty, whereas Cleveland's like, Kyrie Irving's like, see ya, then LeBron James will be like, see ya, and then they'll have literally nothing outside of Kevin Love.
Yeah, I don't know if LeBron's going to leave.
You know, I think it's better for him to do it again. So I think that he leaves. However, I don't blame Kyrie Irving for asking for a trade. I think it would be best for his career. He's always been kind of in LeBron James' shadow. So I think if he went to a different team, one that needs him, they would.
Which kind of brings us back to the Portland thing. It was interesting. Like, if Portland really is invested in him, the only person they could give up would be Damian Lillard, or possibly C.J. McCollum in a draft pick.
I would give Lillard for Kyrie actually.
We won't give up Lillard though because he's our foundation player.
I don't think the Portland
Kyrie Irving. I mean, it's a good trade.
I think the Portland Trailblazers would play for Kyrie Irving.
They're very interested in him, so they could.
I mean, Tracy and Chris, how do you guys feel about that? I mean, to me, Kyrie Irving would be more of an upgrade for Portland. He's been there, took a championship, he has playoff experience.
Nah, I feel like Lillard is an upgrade over Kyrie offensively. Defensively, Kyrie's the better player defensively, but in terms of offense, more points per game, Lillard's the better player. If you want the more complete player, you go with Kyrie. If you want the player that's going to get you the most points per game and put you in the best position to win, get assists, really put you on the map, go with Lillard. And a lot of teams like to build around their draft. And Lillard's contract, I'm going to look that up right now because I don't think they can move Damian Lillard. I love how Ryan comes up with these trade scenarios, but
I don't think Kyrie Irving and Damian Lillard in the backcourt would fit.
I actually think it would. But, see, Chris, I'm the opposite. I think Lillard is the more better all-around player because I think he's better on defense than Kyrie, and I think he's better all-around on offense. And Kyrie, to me, is more of an AI. He's just an efficient Allen Iverson. And Allen Iverson is my favorite player of all time.
I think Kyrie Irving is going to get traded to the Phoenix Suns.
I don't think Lillard's going to get traded at all because this is he enters the second year of a 5-year contract extension that he got last offseason, so logistically it would not make any sense for them to move him at this point. The thing is, though, Kyrie Irving is 2 years younger than Damian Lillard. That's the surprising thing. I mean, Damian Lillard, I think he was a senior at Weber State when he was drafted, whereas Kyrie left after his freshman year at Duke. So that's why Kyrie Irving is 2 years younger. And I'm surprised by that, because I would think, I'm 26, I would think Kyrie Irving was older than me, or my age, at the very worst. So the fact that Kyrie Irving is younger than me makes him the more valuable player long-term if you're trying to build a franchise. So this is a situation where Cleveland is going to have 2 first-round picks because they already have their first-round pick. They're going to get another first-round pick if they trade for Kyrie, and if it's not a lottery pick and they manage to make the playoffs, they can use both of those picks to move up for somebody. So that's definitely something to examine with Kyrie Irving as well. What are your thoughts on this? So that's why I could see why Kyrie's a long-term upgrade, as Ryan pointed out, because he's 2 years younger.
The only reason Kyrie would go to Portland is if we traded C.J. McCollum and drafted like a first or second rounder.
Yeah.
That's like my arm.
And the other thing with Kyrie Irving is his contract only lasts till 2020, whereas Lillard's contract lasts until 2021. And there's no player option in I don't think there's a player option in Damian Lillard's contract for to opt out of the contract. Like they predetermined it in advance and they put the clause together. There's an opt out in 2019, 2020 for Kyrie Irving. So if Kyrie Irving leaves Cleveland, there will be a bailout in his contract. Let's say Kyrie Irving gets traded, hypothetically, and the team inherits his contract from Cleveland. Well, if the team that trades for Kyrie Irving inherits his extension from Cleveland, then Kyrie Irving only has to play for that team for a year or two, and then he can bail out in 2019 if he's not happy with that situation, and then be on the market again. He'd have to rework his contract, but that's definitely something as well.
The creative years in 2020. From what I've been hearing here in Chicago, is that they're interested on Phoenix, that they willing to play Eric Bledsoe and Josh Jackson for Kyrie Irving.
Yeah, I thought the Suns, with Eric Bledsoe, Brandon Knight, they had the luxury of not drafting a point guard, but with Brandon Knight on IR out for the entire year, there's no depth behind Bledsoe, and if Bledsoe gets injured again at point guard, it's just going to be a bad year for Phoenix, man. It's just going to be a bad year. I don't need to go bad like a goat to point out how bad it's going to be for the Phoenix Suns. So, yeah. Okay, the next topic I wanted to bring up really quickly here is the MLB Trade Deadline winners and losers. I know Jose Quintana from the Cubs was a huge pre-trade deadline move, but I think the biggest move was the Dodgers getting Yu Darvish, because Darvish is a guy who can have a 2.40 ERA one night, and the next month he'll have an ERA of 4. When he is healthy, when he is in the zone, he is a top 5 pitcher. But when he is not in the zone, he is a very mediocre pitcher. So if Darvish can play like the pitcher he's capable of, and Kershaw's healthy, I don't think anybody's getting by the Dodgers. Not even my Cleveland Indians, who I picked to beat the Dodgers in the World Series at the beginning of the year. The fact that the Dodgers got Darvish flips the script completely and puts the Dodgers in the position as the team to beat. I love the Cleveland Indians, but they played awful versus Boston, but they rebounded versus the Yankees, so I feel like the Yankees are the one team we can beat in the playoffs. Boston, I'm still kind of torn on, because we swept them last year, but it showed the other night that they're pissed about that. So that series is going to go to 5 games this time around. We might win that, but that's at least going to go to 5 games. And Houston's the one team that I think can beat everyone else. But if Dallas Keuchel and their other starters do not get healthy by the time the playoffs arrive, I think Cleveland could win the AL. But that's really their only bet at this point. There's so much parity right now with Major League Baseball. And I think the Dodgers are the big winners, like I said, Thomas. But another interesting move was the Royals getting Melky Cabrera, because Melky Cabrera is a player that he is. And the Royals had so many guys in contract years. Moustakas, Hosmer, George Springer. I think their catcher is in a contract year as well. So, like, 4 of their biggest bats are in contract years. Lorenzo Cain is in a contract year. Springer's on the Astros. That's not factually correct. But Lorenzo Cain, the center fielder, who from their World Series teams, in a contract year. I got him mixed up with Springer there, but I corrected myself, so it's all good. And Moustakas, Hosmer, Lorenzo Cain, Salvador Perez. I think all of those guys are in contract years, and you can argue those are 4 of the Royals' 5 biggest batters. So I was kind of expecting them to suck this year because I didn't trust their pitching, but they have just been lights out because the guys know they're going to get traded, and they want to keep that team together. And that's making them lethal, plus the addition of Melky Cabrera. So I'm actually kind of surprised, but I applaud their savviness, because I was thinking the exact opposite would happen, and you'd see guys like Hosmer go to the Red Sox since they needed a first baseman. We'd see Lorenzo Cain on the Cubs. That's what I was sort of thinking we would see, but we saw the exact opposite, and I'll credit the Royals for that. So we'll see what happens. If the Indians do not hold on to the division, I can completely understand that angle of it. So what are your thoughts on these trade deadline moves, winners and losers, really quick? I know you want to talk about the Sonny Gray trade to the Yankees, Thomas, and I'm going to let you do that right now before Ryan and Tracy give their thoughts on some of these trades.
So, yeah, Tracy, Ryan,
Fuck Ryan and Tracy, you motherfucker, you. What? Fuck you, bitch.
Is that, can I hear you, Tracy? A random caller from Illinois. There's 2 Illinois. I don't know if I muted Tracy or if I muted the guy who called me a motherfucker. I feel like it's a reality TV show. Is that you, Tracy?
All I gotta say is the guy that called in and talked shit to me, bring it, motherfucker.
Alright, anyway.
Was that you, Did I mute... Tracy, can I hear you? Did I mute the other guy? I just want to confirm that I muted the other guy before we move on.
Okay. Well then. Alright. So, me and Tracy, Ryan, me and Chris talked about the A's the other day, about how they traded Sonny Gray to the Yankees. Now, I understand, yeah, the A's is what we do. We trade our players away because our management is retarded. And I know it seems like it's just getting worse, but me and Chris also talked it out. And this was we probably won this trade, and I'll let Chris explain why we won this trade.
Well, I think Oakland won this trade because they got a lot of good prospects that are already in AAA, and they're guys that are ready to come up next year. And that person's calling back in. I can see. I made sure to mute them. I made sure to mute them. So, but yeah. Anyway, Oakland. I love it. Figured out how to unmute himself, but I just pushed the mute button. Bring it on, motherfucker.
Oh yeah, that's pretty easy to spot that on the phone.
This guy basically interrupted our show, called us a word, and he's from Illinois, just like Tracy. So I can't trace if Tracy's on the call. Now I know I muted the right person, but so guest 8 has logged into the chat. But let's go back to certain topics here. So let's stick with the athletics here, and with the Oakland Athletics, you're looking at a team. I love the trade with the Yankees because they got James Caprillion, the Yankees 2015 first-round pick. They also got, besides from the New York Yankees, they got Pinero, and they got another guy in AAA that can do everything else. So that's one of the things.
And the guys that we recently called up, what were their names again? Chris.
The guys from the Athletics, we brought up some of the players they got in that trade with the Yankees, and I've looked at their minor league system, and
yeah, who was the guys that we had in the farm system that we called up and just like called out on their debuts? Check out their names.
All right, I'm bringing that up right now as we speak. Franklin Barreto is already in AAA, but they got Dustin Fowler from the Yankees, and that's cute. The person posted their phone number in the comments section. That's really adorable. As far as Dustin Fowler, though, he was on the Yankees in AAA, and he bats .293, 13 home runs in Wilkes-Barre Scranton for the Yankees. They have Matt Chapman at third baseman if they trade their starting third baseman. Matt Chapman was a first-round pick in the 2014 MLB Draft out of Cal State Fullerton. He's still developing the minors, and if they trade their third baseman, who's starting ahead of him, Chapman will get called up. Jorge Majedo, another guy they got from the Yankees, can play shortstop or outfielder. He's definitely a future piece with this Yankees team. And the final player they got, James Caprillion, who I mentioned, first-round pick out of UCLA, who I really liked coming out of tape on UCLA 2 years ago when I covered the first MLB draft special on this podcast outside of some of the other stuff. Well, we covered MLB drafts, but like writing code, keeping track of the picks as they're up on the site, that was the first year we did that. So Caprillion is one of those players. So I feel like Caprillion can replace Sonny Gray. You've got A.J. Puck as well, a first-rounder in 2016. Oh, great. There's another guy from Central Colorado that's just
ignore him. Just ignore him.
Is this Ryan's brother? This is going to be... Yeah. Okay.
Just ignore him.
I'm trying to ignore him, but like I am getting trolled so badly here. I've got guests trying to call in and troll me, so it's like WikiLeaks up here on TalkShoe. So we'll see what happens here.
Abrado debuted like a month ago or whatever, and he balled out. Matt Chapman has been playing, and he's been pretty good when he's played. So if we keep Crush Davis, if we keep Rajay Davis, if we keep who is the other star player that we had that was bald?
I think Rajay Davis is in a contract year and he's in his 30s, so I think Fowler's going to replace him. They're probably going to put Maiedo at either shortstop. Sorry, Michigan. I think that caller was from Michigan, so I'm just going to pretend that Slim Shady prank called us and mute this person.
You got Crush Davis, you got Yonder Alonso. You keep those two guys together. You got Matt Chapman, who's on the rise. You got Abreu, who's a young upcoming guy. And then you said we had like a top 5 pick in next year's draft.
Right now, the Oakland Athletics are projected to pick 5th overall.
That's a good starting lineup.
So,
And they should be set up for the future.
yep.
If you keep Yonder and Crush together, and then build with Chapman and those guys in the game, and the guys that are on the farm system.
Yep. And that's... Any thoughts on these MLB trades, Ryan and Tracy, before we get to the Ruiz versus Gordon debate and wrap up the shop here?
Before some other guests.
Yeah, we've already had prank callers from Illinois, Central Colorado, Michigan, and California, and now Central Kentucky. What the heck? It's probably the same guy. Yep.
So, what are your thoughts on the MLB trade, Ryan?
I think the matter of the trade, nobody can stop the Dodgers.
From who?
The Dodgers.
Oh yeah, the Dodgers. Fuck the Dodgers.
Yeah, but I think really, I mean, back to the pitchers, but I mean, from what I've seen, a lot of people are talking.
And the Dodgers are the Patriots in MLB right now.
No, the Dodgers are the Capitals of the MLB because every year they dominate in the regular season, and then they choke in the playoffs like the Capitals. So until they get to a World Series, they're the Capitals of the MLB.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a good place in the MLB. One of the places that I need to come play a couple of moves. But it's going to be interesting to see what team comes out of the nominee session.
Yeah.
Contract is pretty hot since the All-Star play, so it'll be interesting
Yeah.
to see what happens.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
Yeah. But I agree with Tommy. I mean, even though they say love Tommy play, they still have some top prospects on that team.
Oh yeah. It's a big blow, but I understand. We've traded like 3 of our top players the past like 2 months.
Yeah, but you guys have some good players in our farm system that can possibly
Yeah.
go.
Yeah, and then we got a top 5 pick next year. And Chris, who were me and you both projecting that the A's would draft with that pick?
Nick Madrigal. I was torn on him and the other shortstop that's being projected higher.
Magical from my Beavers. Yeah.
Yep. So that's one of the things we're going to look at here. And any thoughts on these trades, Ryan, before we get to our debate, or you would just want? I do want to try to get the Wild versus Ruiz debate in, like I promised our listeners, but at the same time, I can understand if now is a good time to end it but it's up to you. I feel like we should do that really quickly before we end, but we'll see what ends up happening.
You know, let's think about it. You know, let's have all these people that want to call in and interrupt the show know that it ain't bothering us at all, and we're going to keep going on with it.
Yeah, and the person who originally called in left their number in the chat room. So if I give TalkShoe if I send TalkShoe the chat room number through Twitter, they'll probably block the caller, and we won't have to worry about them ever again.
I forgot you had guest calls open. It's been so long on the podcast. I forgot.
Guests can't open, but like if a guest calls in, I could see the location from where they call in.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Where was the one out from Colorado?
I think it's the same caller. because the locations are exactly the same. Like, they alter. I think it's some hacker or something. I don't know who it is, but yeah, because you got the guy from Illinois, then you got the guy from Central Colorado, then you got the guy from Michigan, then you got the guy from Central Coast California, then you got Northern Central Kentucky. I think they're all the same person. Because the Michigan guy and the Illinois guy sounded exactly the same. And Guest 9 is still in the chat room.
Yeah, they sounded British. He's like, I was like, yeah, you're British, dude.
Yep, Guest 9, I knew you were Guest 8. Same exact phone number, but yes. Let's focus on this Ruiz versus Gordon Wild debate. I'm going to make my case for Albert Ruiz first, since he's coming on Sunday's podcast. I think Albert Ruiz, with him, you've got a bigger, taller player at striker, more complete as leadership-wise. The soccer IQ's there. He gets his teammates set up, puts them in a position to succeed. And with his adversity, having to go from the States to play for Florida Gulf Coast and getting offers from different teams in Mexico, from what I've heard from soccer enthusiasts on Reddit, I think he's the best player in the draft. But at the same time, I also believe we're going to see a Generation Adidas player, or maybe even multiple Generation Adidas players picked ahead of him, because Generation Adidas guys usually do get picked first. So, yep, that's definitely that's why I think he's worthy of being the number one pick. What are your thoughts on Gordon Wild? Make your case for Gordon Wild before we end this call, Ryan. Ruiz, but yeah. I agree, Ryan. That's an excellent point. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens, because I think this draft is the deepest striker group since 2012. I want to thank Ryan Romero, Tracy Porter, and Thomas Coburn for calling into the show. We will be back. I'm not going to reveal the time because I don't want the person to troll, but we will be back on Sunday. All right, so long from the Utopia of Sports. We'll see you Sunday with Albert Ruiz on at 11 a.m. Eastern. So thanks for tuning in. We'll see you Sunday. If our show was a little longer, Thomas, I would have let you do karaoke, but with the trolls today, I just wanted to get out there and avert a crisis. We can have TalkShoe. We can copy the number, send it to TalkShoe through Twitter, and have them trace the caller. And if it was, they would take action against him, and you'd be completely off the hook. It's, oh, gosh. That's a big blow for the Dolphins.
Another big blow. Fuck.
It's like hurricane season for the Dolphins with all these injuries this week.
I know. Tannehill. I don't know how long ago Larson tore his bicep. I just heard it from Nathan Gonzalez.
We're off the air on TalkShoe, but we're still on the air on YouTube because I felt like sometimes we say some really cool stuff when we're off the air. I'm going to let it go until the 1 minute, 10-second mark before I stop recording. We're still on YouTube. We're no longer on TalkShoe, though. But thank you so much for tuning in. I'm going to end the YouTube recording, though. So we'll be back on Sunday on YouTube just for the Ruiz interview. The rest of the show you'll have to download through TalkShoe, but I'll post the link to the full TalkShoe podcast in the description.